frustrated. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what we come up with? Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Venus and today I'm going to be reviewing two books. One that drove me absolutely crazy and another that gave me an emotional breakdown. Can you guess which one did which? Let's find out. For each book, the first part's going to be non-spoiler, just a quick synopsis and my rating, and then the other part of the review will have spoilers. So the first book I want to talk about is A History of Wild Places by Shea Ernshaw. This book has been talked about. I've seen it kind of all over the place. One of my favorite booktubers gave it 5 stars. I was browsing my library recently and noticed it, and I was like, oh, this is the book, you know, I've seen all over the place, so perfect. I don't have to pay for it. So I borrowed it and I read it, and let's talk about what it's about. Okay, so this book is considered like a thriller suspense, has some like magical realism in it. That's how it's been described, which all sounds fantastic to me. I'm here for it. It starts off with a character named Travis, who has these abilities to touch objects and can kind of see where people have been. And so he's been used on like cold cases and missing person cases to help find people either dead or alive. And the premise of that sounded fantastic. I loved the way the beginning started. I was like, oh, this is cool. He's going to be like kind of like a detective, and we're going to be finding like clues and go on his journey, and I was all for it. Then he is asked by one of his friends to go and find this author named Maggie St. James, and she writes these dark children's books. Travis goes on the hunt for Maggie St. James. So in about like the first 40 pages, we're following Travis. We're getting a little bit of his backstory, how this gift that he has came to be. We learn a little bit about his family, and he ends up, so, you know, through that, then he goes to meet Maggie St. James's parents and finds out, gets a little bit of information from them and everything. He ends up at this place called Pastoral. And then we kind of go into that portion of the book, and the book takes like this turn that I didn't enjoy. It goes into, Pastoral is almost like this cultish community. And then we start getting these points of view from Calla, Theo, and B. And I'm not going to say anything else for this non-spoiler section, but I'm just going to say, after we got into the cultish community, I just didn't enjoy the turn that it took at all. We barely even got any more of Travis's powers. You know, the way that I thought it was going to go, it didn't go at all. And I just was super let down with the progression of the book. I will say the characters were very well developed. The writing was super atmospheric. It was beautiful. I really, really enjoyed the writing. I just didn't like the story. I didn't like where the story went. So if you and I think, honestly, I think for me, this is the second kind of cultish book I've read this month. The first one I DNF'd, and I'll talk about that in my wrap up for February. And then this one I just didn't enjoy. Actually, the rating for this book I would give 2.5. And I'll go into more detail about why in the spoiler part of it, but like I said, I will say the author, fantastic writer. I would definitely read more of her books because, you know, her writing is very descriptive, very atmospheric. Loved all that first 40 pages of it. It was like perfect. And it's just the story, the way the story developed. I didn't like it. I'm not a fan, I guess, now that I've discovered. I'm not a fan of like books that have like cultish settings because I just get so annoyed by the people that I guess are being, you know, brainwashed by the cult leader. So anyway, that's what I say. Ended up 2.5 stars. I don't know, I'm kind of going back and forth. 2.5 to 3 stars because, like I said, her writing is fantastic. So somewhere in between there. I do recommend it if you enjoy, you know, books that kind of are surrounded by cults. You know, I recommend it. Otherwise, not so much. The book also had great pacing. I finished it in one day. Like, I finished it, I couldn't put it down because the characters, and I really wanted to see, like, I was hoping like more of that like magical realism was going to come into it, or some kind of like grand reveal was going to happen, and it just didn't happen. But the pacing was another thing that was fantastic, because I did read it, you know, in one day. So there's that. So let's get into the spoilers. Once we get into this cultist settlement, there is Calla and Theo, who are married, and they live in this community where everyone is told that, or everyone is afraid of rain, because it's like toxic or something. So if you get it, you're gonna get super sick. So they don't stay out in the rain. They aren't allowed to leave the community, because anything beyond like these certain trees, if you go beyond these trees and you come back, you could bring back the rot to the people in the colony. So it's just super frustrating, because, and it may be just because I overthink stuff, but I was like, are you kidding me? So they can't get rained on. So what are you eating? Like, if you're eating food that's rained on, where's your water coming from? Like, because nobody leaves the colony. So I'm thinking, like, nobody thought to question this. So there's Theo and Calla. They're a married couple. Theo is kind of starting to get these thoughts that he wants to, like, go beyond the trees. He wants to see what's down the road. He wants to go into the real world. So he's been testing the boundaries and actually going outside of these trees, the forest, almost, I think, every day for, I want to say he said a year. I can't remember how long, but he was doing it and getting a little further and a little further without getting caught. And so his wife, Calla, finds out, and she's like, oh my gosh, you're gonna, you know, infect the colony. Like, why are you doing this? How could you do this? You know, if Levi, who is like the cult leader, if he finds out, you know, all this stuff's gonna happen. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So then B is Calla's sister, and she's blind. I really, you know, liked her character. She was well developed. She was a little feisty. She's in a relationship with Levi, who is a cult leader, who ends up, of course, being a total freaking jerk. He marries some other girl and tells B that he's not in love with her, because he was afraid she's gonna leave him one day and leave the colony. We go through all this, events happen, you know, just typical cultish events. They're all scared of everything. They listen to Levi as the leader. Theo found a piece of paper that was written by Travis. He found it in the house. So Theo and Calla realized at some point Travis was in their home. And I'm like, there's literally a human being inside of your home, and you didn't notice it. Okay, that's interesting. I'm like, wow, how? And I mean, I was intrigued. I was like, okay, how's that gonna play out? And then Calla finds a little charm that Maggie St. James had. She like wrote, I think, 4 or 5 books, and she would get a charm for a bracelet, like for each book. So Calla found this little charm and one of the books that Maggie St. James wrote. So they're starting to put these pieces together, and they're like, okay, so they must have both been here in the colony. So we need to, you know, they're trying like to figure out how they can get more information. So Levi's drinking a lot. So I'm like, okay, obviously he's got some kind of secrets he's hiding, covering up with the, you know, drinking his pain away, I guess. And then, so all this happens. I don't even want, the point of it is, what drove me crazy is that when they try to finally escape and they start putting all the pieces and puzzles together, and B goes back to, like, you know, one last time, talk to Levi before she leaves. He, of course, he's drunk, he gets angry, he shoves her in a closet, and she finds out in the closet, there's like books in there, that there's a book about hypnotism. And that's the reveal. Levi has been hypnotizing everyone in the settlement, including B. He hypnotized her for her to think that she's blind. I'm like, what? I was so frustrated. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what we come up with? Like, this is what, I'm like, how is everyone in the colony hypnotized? Like, what kind of, oh, okay. So yeah, that's the big reveal. Everyone in the colony was hypnotized. B magically, her vision magically returned, and they get all, you know, she decides, by the way, B finds out she's pregnant with Levi's baby, and he didn't care. Because he's got this other woman that he married. He ends up killing Levi. She decides she's going to stay in the settlement and raise her baby because she doesn't want to go into the real world. Theo and Calla, meanwhile, realize that Theo is actually Travis. His memory comes back and he's able to touch things again, which his power was completely suppressed because Levi hypnotized him. And Calla is also Maggie St. James. So they figure that out. And I'm like, this is so frustrating. They decide they're going to go back into the real world. Of course, there's all this media because they're like, oh, the missing people have returned. Because Travis, meanwhile, this has been, I want to say 3 years. Travis goes into pastoral and has also disappeared for 3 years. And I think Maggie St. James, Calla, was gone for 5 years. So they go back into the world. She finds out from her mom that, or Maggie St. James / Calla finds out from her mom that she was actually born in pastoral and her father was the original cult leader before Levi took over. So she now all of a sudden, in finding this out from her mom and not feeling comfortable in the real world, because she's been in pastoral for the last 5 years. And Travis also, because he had some tragedy in his life because he lost his sister to a drug addiction. That's kind of discussed too before he goes and finds Maggie St. James. And he felt guilty because he didn't find her in enough time with his power or whatever. So he blamed himself for not finding her enough time. So they decide to go back to live in pastoral and live happily ever after. And that's the end of the book. And it drove me crazy. Please, if you're someone that loved this book, like, did you enjoy that? Or is it just me? Because the hypnotism part, I'm sorry, that was like a little rant. I got a little excited there. But if you like cult books, or books like with cult leaders and hypnotism, then you may like that. Maybe that's why everybody liked it and I didn't, because I don't like that stuff. So, but I will say again, author, fantastic writing, because I couldn't put it down. The next book that I want to talk about is Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. This is, I want to say, my 5th Colleen Hoover book. I've loved all of her books, I really have. I am a fan. Didn't like Layla too much. I think that was the lowest rating book. I gave like 3 stars, but the rest of them have been like 4 to 5 stars that I've read. And this one was no exception. It was fantastic. I really, really, really love this book. It's the book that gave me an emotional breakdown. So this will be the non-spoiler section. Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover is about a woman named Kenna, and she is recently released from jail, I believe after serving 5 years in jail for a tragic mistake. She is going back to the town. She wasn't born there, but it's a town that she lived in for I think like 6 months or so. And she's going back to that town because her 4-year-old daughter is there. And she wants to reconnect with her daughter and hopefully get custody of her. And of course, the grandparents don't want that to happen. So she goes back, and in the beginning, she meets Ledger at his bar. And I will say, it's definitely in Still-Lovey. They have very strong kind of connection or physical attraction in the first, in the very beginning of the book, which, it works. I was fine with it. So it's basically Kenna's journey trying to get her custody of her daughter. And I'm not going to say anything about that anymore because I don't, and Ledger is the I guess, love interest in this book. So I'm not going to say anything more in this non-spoiler section of it. I gave it 5 stars. Of course, it's a Colleen Hoover book. I cried. I sobbed. I was no good. I needed a moment. And then I had the nerve to read this on my lunch break at work. And I'm like, how am I supposed to even function after this? And like I said, I gave it 5 stars. And if you're in the mood for crying, then give it a go. And now I just kind of want to talk about some spoilers. if you read the book, I really loved Roman's character, and this is Ledger's friend who works at the bar with him. I love that he played devil's advocate because Kenna was involved in a fatal car accident that killed her boyfriend Scotty. And when she ends up in jail for 5 years. She's pregnant. She didn't know she was pregnant when the accident happened. And so Scotty's parents end up getting custody of Diem, which is the little girl in this book. And so Kenna is coming back to this town to get custody of Diem, try to be, a mom to her, try to be in her life. And Ledger was Scotty's best friend. And Kenna never met him, but he was mentioned. Scotty did mention him. They just never had a chance to actually meet face to face. So when Ledger says what his name is, and then she sees this truck that he has, that Scotty actually drove before, she recognizes Ledger's truck. She realizes, oh gosh, this is going to be a problem. So anyway, they start developing feelings. Ledger discovers who she is very quickly, after their night. And he's super conflicted because he is actually a huge part of Diem's life. He literally lives across the street from Scotty's parents, and he sees her every day. He takes her to t-ball. She loves. So Ledger has such a cute relationship with Diem. He's super close to Scotty's parents. Basically, have known them his whole life, and so he's struggling. Like, he really initially has like this physical attraction to Kenna. So because Kenna was driving a vehicle, she was drunk and also high, and the car flipped. Scotty died, and she left the scene of the crime. So they've all felt like she was unremorseful. She didn't show any emotion at court. She pled guilty to it. So they just felt like she was just like this cold-hearted woman who didn't care that she killed Scotty. So the parents are super angry, have no forgiveness for her. Ledger's struggling. He's initially angry when he finds out because he feels almost like, did she know who I was and is trying to use me to get to Diem? And Roman, and I say all this to say, Roman is his best friend, and he plays, devil's advocate. There's a scene in the book where Ledger's, being, upset and kind of angry at Kenna, feels like, she used him, like I said, to get to Diem, and he's like, I can't remember how Roman worded it, but he basically was like, she's a mom. She's trying to get to know her daughter, and she, after this tragic mistake, people make mistakes. It, may have just been an accident, and we don't really know her side of the story. So it kind of makes Ledger, I guess, rethink things. He's intentional about trying to get to know her more and figure out, are her intentions good? Are her intentions real to get to know her daughter? And I can't remember who said it, but there was a quote that I really liked, and I can't remember who said this, but a good person that had one bad night. This is such a tough situation because it's like super frustrating. Kenna actually, she killed someone by being, irresponsible and making just a stupid, horrible decision. Yet here she is, she's done her time. She is super remorseful. You find out she's been writing these like letters to Scotty hundreds of letters to him, just talking to him, and the letters are kind of are woven throughout the story. Find out her side of what happens. And the things that Ledger does in this book, he's so sweet. And so there's this one part where she doesn't like listening to music because it just makes her super sad, which, and it's crazy because sometimes certain songs you listen to in a certain part of your life takes you back to those moments and you don't want to listen to it, and so that's kind of how she is. So she doesn't like music, and once they start kind of starting to get to know each other and they're spending time together, so he makes this playlist for her that has nothing to do about sad, like, love songs. It's just all this, like, these other, like, random songs that he picked for her. And it's cool because in the book, at the end of it, there's I guess Ledger's playlist that he made for her, and they're like MC Hammer and I think Pink, or it's just like all these like random songs. When Kenna comes to town, she goes to move in like this rundown apartment because she barely has any money. And then she also has a neighbor, I think I can't remember how old she is. She's like a teenager, and she has Down syndrome, and she calls herself Lady Diane, and she's so funny. And she sees Kenna crying one day over or she's upset about an interaction that she had with Ledger. And it kind of tells her, you know, oh, he made me sad, or it's his fault that I'm crying, or it's his fault that I'm like this. So for the rest of the book, anytime that Lady Diane or Lady Diana sees Ledger, she calls him a jerk. And it's funny. And Ledger just laughs at it. Colleen Hoover writes this like tangible tension in her books. Like you could just feel the attraction and the emotions that Ledger and Kenna were starting to develop for each other, even like outside of her trying to find her daughter. Ledger is such a great person, and even Kenna, you know, outside of this horrible mistake that she made, she is really, you know, a great character, the way Colleen Hoover wrote her, and it just makes you root for her. Even though she did this horrible, tragic thing, it really just makes you, like, root for her this whole, like, you know, the whole time you're reading the book. And as they're getting to know each other more, it's just like it's just so good. It was so good. And then it builds up and builds up, and they're spending all this time together, and you know that at some point Ledger has to let the grandparents know, or he has to let Scotty's parents know, because they're gonna flip out. The father, I can't remember his name, Scotty's father finds out. They get into like this huge fight. Scotty's father like basically beats him up. Like he finds out, and he like, you can't expect us to forgive her. She just left our son, you know, on the side of the road to die, because had she went and gone for help, he could have lived, because he was still alive for hours after she left. So it's just like they can't even try to imagine forgiving her. And through the time that Kenna and Ledger were spending together, Ledger really wanted to hear her side of the story. So she ends up reading the letter to Scotty that she wrote about what happened that night. And let me tell you, tears were rolling down my face. That letter was it was hard. You know, just, she talked about what happened, you know, what was going through her mind, what he looked like. Oh, it was so hard. What happened during the court, you know, session, where she was just numb and super depressed and just didn't even feel like she deserved any type of other chances. So she just pled guilty, and then she finds out she's pregnant. So that's when she kind of wanted to fight for her daughter. But that letter, it broke me. After Scotty's parents find out that he's been spending time with Kenna, he comes back and he's like, look, I know there's probably nothing that I can say, but can you at least, and I'm always going to choose Diem. Like, he had given Kenna money to leave town, you know, it broke his heart to do that. Kenna was like, just, I'll take some money and I'll leave town, because they're never going to forgive me. They're never going to, you know, let me have custody of her, because her rights were terminated. So she couldn't even legally, you know, she really had no rights to Diem, because they had terminated her rights while she was in jail, because she was in jail for so long. Anyway, Ledger goes, after getting beat up by Scotty's dad, he brings the letter that Kenna wrote about what happened that night, and he leaves them, and he's like, you let me know after reading this letter if you really don't want anything to do with her. I will always choose Diem, but, you know, I really feel like she should be given a chance. So, and then you see Kenna kind of trying to get ready to leave town, and Ledger knocks on the door, and he's with Scotty's mom, and Scotty's mom is called Grace. And I just thought that was so fitting, because this book really is, at the end of the day, about forgiveness and giving someone grace, you know, for the horrible mistakes that they've made. And so Scotty's mom, I remembered her name, Grace, knocks on the door, and there's this scene that Kenna talks about with her and Scotty. So you do get to see parts of their relationship, Scotty and Kenna's relationship, throughout, because letters are kind of, like I said, interwoven throughout the story. So you're seeing their relationship with Scotty, and Scotty was a good person, you know, and it even makes it even harder knowing that he was a good person and this happened, because he loved her so much. They even went to pick out he wanted to pick out like a gift for her, and she saw this beautiful like ring, and it ended up being like $4,000. So he was like, I can't afford that. And so when Grace, his mom, knocks on the door, comes to finally talk to her, she has the ring. Oh my gosh, she has the ring that Scotty bought. He came to his parents and asked them to borrow money so that he could buy this ring so that nobody else bought it before he had a chance to save up money for it. And Grace had kept this ring because she had hoped to one day give it to Diem. And so after reading the letter that Kenna wrote about the events that happened that night, she came and she gave her the ring and forgave her, and then happy ever after. It was, look, I know Colleen Hoover is, you know, some people absolutely, it's polarizing. Like, some people love her, some people hate her. This book, it was perfect. I loved it. I loved every second of it. 5 stars. 5 emotional stars. The way that she wrote every single character's point of view and perspective, it was, you understood it. You were like, yes, I can understand why his parents don't want anything to do with her. Like how they would be angry with Ledger for getting into a relationship. This was his best friend, and this woman killed him. And I can understand Ledger being conflicted. Like, you know, I love Diem. She has a right to know her mom. This woman seems like a great person that made a horrible mistake. So I can see her, you know, his point of view. And then, of course, Kenna, she's the one that this happened to. She made a stupid, horrible mistake. She thought that he had died, panicked, and left the scene of the crime. Meanwhile, she is drunk and she is high. Stupid, horrible mistake. And you see like all these perspectives and you can understand it. It's a hard situation, and the way Colleen Hoover handled it, I just thought it was beautiful. I've rambled on for long enough. So this clearly was the book that gave me an emotional breakdown, but I loved every second of it, and I definitely recommend it, especially if you love Colleen Hoover, which you probably already read it because it's been out for a couple months now. But I just wanted to talk about these 2 books because one of them annoyed me and the other one was like fantastic. So those are 2 books that I wanted to talk about. I hope you enjoyed me ranting and raving about these 2 books, and I appreciate, of course, as always, the time that we spend together virtually, and I hope you hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you again soon. See ya!